you agree to these measures, or should I make it red?
Well, with the conditions, then yeah.
With conditions.
Conditions.
Put it after dams.
Wait, let's move on to the dams discussion. So China, you obviously know the dams discussion is your initiative. You discussed it often in the negotiations. Has anyone changed their minds since the negotiations?
We have a lot to add.
The U.S.
We would be interested in funding a research project to look at the environmental impacts of those dams before we approve for sure their construction.
China, do you have any thoughts about that?
Our research, as the official Hua Shangyang said, the hydropower stations that we are building will not affect the flow or the ecological systems of the rivers. So countries,
Let him finish.
countries like India will not be affected by our dams because they're mostly run-of-river dams, so we are not stealing away the water. Only a portion of it is the water that we are keeping and distributing to 100 million citizens with no improved water system in our country.
India would like to emphasize that China needs to be more transparent about their plans because that statement was released 3 years after, or not 3 years, I want to say 3 years sounds right, but it was after the dam was built.
It remains valid.
But you're also proposing building 3 more dams, and that has an effect.
I'm just concerned about the claim that building a dam won't change the water flow.
It will not, because they're
How does that possible? That's what a dam does.
Because it's
they're
runoff.
run-of-river dams. And according to the UN Convention on Transboundary Water of 1997, our country has a full right to build a dam for the benefit of our population.
With all of that being said, thank you, Pedro. With all that being said, is there any opposition?
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Yes. Okay. All right, India?
So, although you talked about when we talked in our negotiations about giving water to Chinese citizens using your dams, like creating reservoirs and stuff, that has a huge environmental impact, as well as taking water away from India, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Nepal, all of those that runs the river's course. Also, India has a huge concern because the past has proven to show badly on China. China did the same thing with the Mekong River, which was the 12th largest river in the world and the 7th largest in Asia. And it served countries like Tibet, Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam. And today, all those countries aren't receiving water from that river. So that's a main concern from SARC countries and India.
SARC?
I think SARC would like to add an amendment that each time a dam is constructed, it would have to be researched by an independent group and approved by all SARC nations, including India.
So it seems that there is not consensus on this dam decision. Would we like to mark that down?
Yes.
Is that okay with you, Nikin?
Yes.
All right. So while Nikin types up the dam's consensus, we're going to return back to the U.S. debt repayment plan. I know, Alyssa, you touched upon that earlier. Now you're coughing. Is there anything else that you wanted to expand on that you said earlier? Anything different? No.
I mean, we would stand by what we said before, just again, that we would support a joint collaboration.
We have a risk.
And that we have some concerns about the relevancy of this to a climate international policy negotiation.
Well, I would like to say that it is hugely relevant because for China to invest in the South Asia region, we need the capital to do so. So, on that basis, I think that it is relevant to this discussion.
We'd also like to add, that you are concerned about collaboration and joint collaboration between our two countries, but the fact of the matter is that we are a leader in solar power. So if you're looking for increased research or development, that's something that we already have. So why not just use our resources and our people and implement that to benefit your country and your renewable resource development? That's our stance.
Sorry?
So this may not appear to impact us directly, but we believe that there might be severe economic repercussions if this much debt is repaid by the U.S. So we would want some concrete economic proof that this will benefit not only China and not only the U.S. but the entire world, because we're a little worried about the effects.
Well, that's not something we can really provide right now.
Yeah.
And we're saying that we're going to put a lot of that into sustainability and
Right,
sustainable methods.
we're saying that a lot of economists believe that if the U.S. paid back all of its debt to China, it would crash the world market.
This is also
So are you proposing a stipulation to conduct an independent economic study into the proposed plan?
Yes.
And we're open to talking about a timeline, so not giving us 1.27 trillion at once, but a way to get the money over time gradually, and then implementing it in a way that's going to help the entire world, just saying.
India?
I just had a question. Is China the leader in manufacturing solar energy or researching solar energy and inventing?
Can you ask the press that question? Did you guys hear?
No.
Is China the leader in solar energy?
Basically.
Yeah.
Manufacturing energy.
Well, also that I said, well, is China the leader in inventing it and coming up with certain technologies for solar energy, or are they just the manufacturers? Because normally the normal plan is stuff is thought up of in the US and then given to China to make.
Well,
Yeah. So that your plan.
okay,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
over the last, especially over the last decade, China has prioritized the development of alternative energy technology. So
What does that mean?
That we both researched and manufactured it so heavily that we are a leading body in this field.
according to who? China.
I'm just curious, who?
Intervention, there is basic research in the science, which I think is still led by the US in this case, but then there is research in implementation, there is research in adaptation, there is research in best practices, and in solar, that's where China is the leader. Just a point of factual issues.
I wasn't arguing, I was just asking.
Thank you.
So we do agree that the U.S. has to repay its debt to China. However, it is completely unfeasible for this to be a one-time payment. We
never said. Sorry.
Yeah, but there was also never a time frame that was included. So we can and we will repay our debts over a long period of time, and we do approve the fact that the money from our debt will be going into sustainable development within South Asia.
So I believe this is covered under maybe edit timeline. Yeah, I think that's covered under timeline.
As long as the time frame is adhered to. Yeah.
Okay. On to the next point.
And everyone is in agreement about this?
And you're in agreement if the economic study finds that the payment plan agreed upon is not potentially dangerous or high risk to the world.
Yeah, especially to developing countries.
So sort of.
All right, we're gonna move on to point 7.
When you say independent study on.
You might want to make that 6 at least yellow. Yeah. But yellow. There is a caveat. There is a big caveat.
Make it orange.
There you go. Only if 60 is successful, you get to go ahead. Yep.
And so China owns debt.
That's a question. Because it's our money.
I don't think
No,
they
actually,
do it.
okay. India might want to.
Yeah, India would like some money.
I think that debt is strengthening their relationship.
Okay, so we're gonna move on to point 7. It is procurement of funds from the G7. Who came up with that point? Just
It
to,
was India and the UN.
Yeah.
alright, would you like to expand upon that a little bit more?
Okay.
We'll do that.
Yeah, so the UN recognized that for India to develop successfully and sustainably, they're going to need help because you can't automatically switch to renewable resources if you're still a developing nation. So we wanted to focus on funds such as the Green Climate Fund and other UN programs from the G7 nations that will help India to put that money into climate adaptation and mitigation and developing sustainable practices, so then they can use their money to better develop as a nation and put more money into education and infrastructure.
Is there any opposition? Yeah, sorry.
Not opposition, but SARC would like to clarify that it would be a problem for India to procure funds from the G7 and the rest of the SARC countries to not, because you're already having an influx of workers from like Bangladesh who have no job opportunities. So India really needs the countries around it to grow economically as it does.
And we already talked about this with the UN, so
Yeah.
it's confusing.
Just a quick point, I believe we did cover developed nations investing in SARC. And I think this.
Just the G7
It's
specifically.
the G7, we want to include SARC with G7.
On the Green Climate Fund, we spoke with the UN and agreed that it's something we did.
Yeah, I think that the United Nations would be supportive of investing money from the G7 and any funds that we get from developed nations to go into developing nations, that it would not be only for India, it would be for the entire South Asia region, which includes the SARC.
Right. We knew we agreed on it.
Yeah,
Put
I
SARC in the top
think
with
just
India?
the bullet points are.
Could you put India and SARC or just put
Or just
SARC?
SARC.
Can India clarify something?
Sure.
We said that we would invest in countries in SARC if we had improved our resources.
Yeah.
Or using the funds
Yeah, from-
allocated from the G7.
Right. Yeah.
But we
were talking about
also want ones just from
Oh,
G7.
okay.
Okay.
So we don't want to just rely on you guys.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
Well, if we had more money, we would be able to give you. So in the end,
That's like a third party.
Just go up to the first bullet about it and add G7. Instead of developing nations, instead of developed nations,
Developed nations.
no, number 3. Developed nations / G7.
And then it's the same.
And then I think everybody's
develop
satisfied.
our technology while helping your country.
You asked, would you like to?
Yeah, so it has to be yellow. This is an unrealistic proposal to negotiate among the current negotiators here. We're the only G7 player being represented. We can't speak for all G7 nations, although we are definitely open to dialogues with the other G7 nations. But currently, because we're the only G7 nation here, I'm not sure how this can be approved without the other G7 nations. Does that make sense?
Okay, so.
Yeah, I think it originated more as like UN support of this program. So obviously we can't agree to anything that the G7 is going to do since they're not all here. But the idea is that we'll sponsor dialogues and
The UN programs will invest in SARC and.
We don't have to agree.
So is this just saying that the US and UN will support this at the G7?
Yeah.
yeah.
We said we would support dialogue.
Okay, so
That's
all this is saying.
It just
I
needs to
think
be
it needs to be
worded.
rewritten.
Like this, it doesn't make sense.
It's a proposal to the G7.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe change the bullet point to, and anyone correct me if I'm wrong, US and UN agree to appeal to G7 to invest in India and SARC.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to move on to number 8, expanding the U.S.-India dialogue. Is there any opposition to that one?
Well, and then 7 is black, right?
Back to black?
Yes,
Seven
now
is
that it's back to black.
Love that song.
China, any opposition to expanding U.S.-India dialogue?
No FOMO or anything?
Okay, I think that the more contentious point goes to number 9, UN inspection. I know we already had some discussions about that earlier. I know that U.S. and China were a bit concerned about inspections. Would you like to speak to that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When we originally discussed that point, it wasn't a UN inspection. It was utilizing like a system of group checks and balances because the UN can't enforce any. We don't have enforcing power. So the idea was that the countries involved could enforce the the emission standards themselves by either imposing some sort of sanctions when people did not meet the goals, or something else along those lines.
And it would have to be something that would be agreed upon, some sort of sanction that would be agreed upon right from the outset, so right when countries sign on to whatever protocols are agreed to at the Paris talks later this year, that we would figure out some sort of sanction and some sort of check and balance system, whether it be an economic sanction or some sort of something else.
India, US, China, are you okay with enforcing economic sanctions as a result of emissions? Or possible?
That being a possible means for checks and balances.
Okay, India?
I think the sanctions would create a lot of tension between different countries that decide like, oh, if the U.S. and India were to be like, oh, we're going to impose sanctions on China, if they don't get to this, or if they don't get to that certain level, it creates rivalries between a lot of countries within the UN. So I don't know if that's the right move.
Yeah, sanctions are a bad idea.
Yeah, sorry, are you raising your hand? Or just waiting? Okay. China, do you have a point to make?
Yeah, so we will comply with the group checks and balances system. However, we also are opposed to the sanctions. I mean, we personally know that we are not going to be doing anything that will be deserving of a sanction, so we don't find it necessary or applicable to us, so we don't want to comply with that.
Yes. Also, the idea of sanctions kind of originated more as a sub-bullet of checks and balances. It was just one possible solution and one possible enforcing mechanism that we had come up with. We're open to other enforcing mechanisms that countries could use within themselves. It doesn't have to be sanctions. The main idea here was just that there would be some sort of consequences could be determined for not meeting emission standards.
Press release. Over my dead body, says Sarah Palin. When asked whether UN inspectors or sanctions may be imposed on the United States, ex-President Obama, who took a more balanced view, mentioned that US domestic regulations and policies should be enough to enforce these sanctions instead of requiring UN inspectors.
Well, we agree with no sanctions. We don't think there's a reliable way of carrying those out, and like how those sanctions would actually be met and reliably be met with every country. So we don't want sanctions either.
So because of our stakeholders in the private sector, our negotiation team also disapproves sanctions and emphasizes that our country we are attempting to improve regulation on emission standards internally.
You need to be there. We don't care.
So, yeah.
Okay, any other points that we haven't discussed?
What's on the second page of this document?
Yeah, India?
On the consequences, I think the cap and trade system is something that prevents the need for consequences, because if a country goes over their allotted or whatever, their consequences that they have to spend more money. So I think that's an easy.
So,
on carbon emissions.
Are you trying to say that cap and trade is a part of the consequences,
Or not, it's part of consequences, but I feel like there's not a need for official consequences when you're proposing a cap and trade system.
This also was developed before we heard about the cap.
Okay, so would we put consequences as non-consensus then?
I think the U.S. unfortunately rejected the cap and trade system.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And so
You can put in like parentheses, like maybe no if cap and trade goes through.
You could just put it under a bullet point under cap and trade. No, because
No,
that's all
since it's
wrong.
not-
This is
it's just-
It's just like, okay, on that note, our discussions come to a close.
All right, press and advisors. This whole negotiations has created quite a stir in Russia and the ex-Soviet Union and CIS nations that they were excluded, and they have points of view and they see themselves as stakeholders, and others within this region see themselves as stakeholders. Thankfully, the international press has been able to obtain two of their most important negotiators right here to just state their opinions. Would you want to state an opinion on behalf of CIS in general, and Russia, if you will, about South Asia adaptation emission climate?
Yeah, considering the imperialistic politics that
Yes.
I may be subjective, but
No.
I'm sure
We want
because
your opinion,
I'm-
subjective as they may be.
Yes, but considering that I'm Georgian, yes, it's okay. Considering the Russian politics nowadays, I do not think that implementation of new adaptation policies, which includes what we discussed, like caps, carbon emission reduction, and decrease, is something Russia would agree on. Because especially in the northern part, like Siberian regions, if you go to extreme south, which are the regions near like Georgian border, for example, and like administrative republics there, they are in, and including my country, including Georgia, they're in the position of SAARC nations because they do not have enough resources for now to agree what, for example, to what US suggested, or like for example like GDP, using GDP as a source to count the emissions, and considering the Russian politics and the fact that all these administrative republics, which are at the level of development same as the SAARC nations, and they have unstabilized political situation, and domestic policy is not as stoic, and you mentioned that we should also consider the domestic policy. Considering all these factors, I don't think that negotiations would be smooth with Russia. However, in favor to I would say in favor to Asian, Eastern politics, there might be some fake steps from Russian government, which we have been in terms of for example, free trade, or which was not the free trade actually, and when we have seen that they, instead of letting the free trade and letting the Eastern European flow into Russian Federation, they imposed embargo on them. And considering all these shifts that Russian government does, I think that actual result would not be favorable in all the small parts that are very underdeveloped of Russia, republics within the Russian Federation. They are in the position of SAARC, and I think they would be glad to seek for foreign help rather than the help from the Russian government.
Russia also has some of the largest petrochemical reserves that.
Yeah, I would say if we go resource-wise, I don't know if that's the word, considering how much money Russia makes and how dominant it is because of its gas resources, and Gazprom is one of the world's largest companies, I would say that in terms of industries, and even though they are private, they are largely under the government control. Of course, they would oppose the idea of even cap limits or anything that is related to their emission reduction.
Let's go to our second Russian or third expert on Russian and CIS affairs, Professor Majumdar. Just hold on 1 second while the technical issues are addressed.
Meeting has strongly objected to the use of words like fake trade liberalization as used by the Georgian spokesperson, which we believe is an outcome of biased Western propaganda that most of these states are subjected to nowadays. Russia has to say that it will only do whatever is necessary to protect its own interest. It will not allow its citizens to go back to the days of late 1990s when production, income and consumption was at the lowest level. For that, whatever resource use it has to make, it will do. It will also look at energy security of our southern states and the republics and CIS states that border our western and southern boundaries. And of course, in exchange of that, we would expect that those states will be a partner in development and environmental policy of Russia. Stop.
I don't agree with this. The only thing I agree with is that Russian government would try definitely to secure its positions within the country. But as for securing the interests of its citizens, I think that's a myth which was generated from the Russian government itself, and especially I would say Putin-Medvedev duo, because let's take like elementary things like elementary livelihood necessities and like demands are not met in Russian Federation. And Russian Federation is not just Moscow. So Moscow may be a megapolis which might impress the Western world, impress the Asia, impress South Asia, impress everyone. But like it's a huge country, it's a huge monopoly of natural resources as well as like especially gas. And I think that like in this case, Gazprom stands higher than the citizens do.
Okay, thank you very much. Is that?
Hello, my name is Alina Rossi-Conaway and I'm speaking on behalf of Team China. So overall we are very pleased with the outcome of the recent negotiation proceedings. Some of our major initiatives receive support from the other countries involved, including the SAARC countries and India and the US and also the UN. So one of our major initiatives was to implement education reform, specifically with regards to equal education opportunities for women in the South Asian countries. We believe that this widespread implementation will help reduce income inequality and also reduce population growth, which will, as a result, reduce strain on our natural resources, which are very limited. We also receive support from the UN to call on developed nations such as the United States to reduce their emissions and also to invest in the sustainable development of countries in South Asia and also alternative energy technology. However, there were some aspects of our initiatives that remain unresolved and we expect to proceed further with those. So the US is in debt to China about $1.27 trillion and we would like to work out a payment plan with the US. However, we were not able to work out the details of that, so we would like to collaborate further. In addition, a huge priority for China is to implement some dams on the Brahmaputra River to provide water to our northern population, which has very limited access to water. This is a priority for China, and unfortunately we were not able to receive support during our negotiation process, so we will continue to work to collaborate with the other countries to receive support in the future. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, my name is Rachel Dowley and I'm representing SAARC today, and it was this whole war game experience was a really wonderful opportunity for us because it was nice to have SAARC have their own voice apart from India. We were able to represent different countries that are normally minorities, even though they're the most vulnerable to climate change. It was really nice, especially to gain respect from the United States and the United Nations, as they were willing to and actually passed funding to be able to help us with sustainable development within our countries. just to help improve our infrastructure. It was a little frustrating today with cap and trade agreements with carbon emissions. We were never able really to reach a consensus, and it was really unfortunate that we weren't able to use a per capita quota basis, because that would have been really beneficial to SARC. We have ongoing work that we want to do with dams in terms of what China wants to do. Certain dams that they are wanting to build is certainly threatening to certain of the countries within SARC, like Nepal. And we're hoping to have ongoing work to be able to have mutually beneficial dams that both help us with our power and with our infrastructure, but also keep our ecosystem healthy. We also are very excited about the potential of building railroads within that will cut through Afghanistan and through Pakistan and help possibly bring greater health in the economy to those countries. And we're looking forward to the potential of that. Altogether, it was really great to be able to have SARC be united, aside from India today, to be able to have all of our countries that have differences be united together, and to put our other political differences aside to be able to be all united and really try to combat the issues that we're facing with climate change. Thank you.
I'm Jake Messner, and I'm representing the United States of America. We are thrilled to have participated in this climate change negotiation regarding policies in South Asia, especially in India. We did not support China in their dam construction project because we want further research to be conducted before we agree to such dams, although we did support China in their agreement that we would spend 5% of our debt to China on renewable energy sources in the United States of America. That is $63.5 billion of debt that will be forgiven. We also did not accept China's debt repayment plan in the short term, although we plan to negotiate with them a long-term debt repayment plan over the next several centuries. We talked with SARC and we agreed to implement a cap and trade policy on carbon credits such that richer nations such as ourselves could buy carbon credits from developing nations like SARC, although we ultimately agreed that a strict international cap on carbon was not realistic in the near future and would be looked at in further negotiations. Additionally, we agreed with all developing nations, including India, China, and the SARC countries, that we would help fund their efforts for sustainability as they develop towards more developed nations like the United States. We discussed with the UN inspections on US factories that we had outsourced to China and India, although our stakeholders made us disagree with this measure, so we will not be having those inspections without another negotiation. Additionally, we talked with China and India about our outsourcing, and we came to the conclusion that we are helping their economy develop through our employment of Chinese and Indian skilled laborers, and so those will not be inspected for the time being. We look forward to further negotiations. Thank you, and may God bless the United States of America.
Hi, I'm Justin Nguyen, and I'll be representing Team India from the second war game. So, in our negotiations during the war game, we were decently pleased with the conditions that we had come up with together, but there were some that we were not so pleased with. So first and foremost, we had wanted support from the UN Green Climate Fund, such that there would be international sharing of know-how on how to make our technologies more green. We had wanted to use the funds from the Green Climate Fund in order to better our green technologies, and so that we could use our own domestic money to better education. We had wanted a cap and trade policy with support from the US and G7 countries, but with India having a lower cap per capita rather than per GDP. But we didn't really agree with the US on that, so there wasn't really a conclusive solution to that. We wanted expansion of US-India dialogues, so that was achieved. We had wanted more regulation on multinational companies within India, specifically American companies, so we wanted them to be making sure that the companies that they outsource to India aren't emitting too much. But I think we agreed to that. And we also want to be able to keep those jobs in India, and so that those those foreign companies that are coming in, we want them to have Indian employees rather than outsourcing more American employees to India. And we had wanted a transnational trade route with China and SARC countries. However, we weren't able to agree on that because China was adamant on agreeing to that with the condition that India agrees to a dam on the Brahma Putra River, which because it would definitely deprive Indian citizens of water. We were not willing to concede on that point. And additionally, we're interested in investing in renewable energies within other SAARC countries, provided that India would receive portions of the energy that's produced.
Hello, I'm Major Forrest. I'm a representative of the UN in the second war game. And so our big goal for this war game was to make sure that all the countries could maintain under 2 degrees Celsius. And so one of our what we were adamant about was making sure that all the countries could maintain a framework in order to accomplish that goal. And so we understood that developing countries need to focus on developing. So that means like eradicating poverty and helping out with people who are vulnerable. So that means that they're going to emit more carbon. So we wanted to make sure that the developed countries could counteract that by investing in renewable energy sources both abroad and domestically. And so that we can maintain that goal of staying under 2 degrees. Fortunately, the countries represented at the war game all agreed to the U.S. investing in renewable energy sources. We couldn't necessarily get that same result from all of G7 countries because not all G7 countries were represented in the war game. And also there were some failures that we had that we wanted the UN to accomplish. For example, we were expecting for the countries to agree for us to inspect them and to inspect their carbon emissions. However, they weren't too keen on that idea. However, other accomplishments included India agreed to receive support from us through the UN Green Climate Fund, as well as expansion of US-India dialogue so that other countries can model after that, and also agreeing to the idea of renewable energy sources as well, including SAARC and SAARC as well. Oh, and the US as well agreed to prioritize humanitarian aid and to increase their funding for developing countries. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Nikin Taran and I am the team moderator for the second Climate War Game on international policy. Today I will be discussing a list of points we came to an agreement to. The first point is improving economy for China, India and the SAARC region. All the teams involved agreed on reducing the Gini coefficient of this area. The first measure was educational reform, spearheaded by China. Otherwise, China will invest in educational reform in the entire region. All teams agreed to this. The second method of reducing the Gini coefficient was quotas for women to get admitted into educational institutions. SAARC disagreed upon this, and all other teams agreed. A second way to improve the economy of this region was trade routes. A Trans-Asian Railroad was agreed upon all the teams, whereas a free trade agreement for this region was opposed by India. The third point for improving the economy was the US will increase its foreign direct investment in the region. All teams agreed to this. And the fourth was checking the practices of US multinational companies in this area. The US opposed UN inspections of their industries in this region. The second main point was reducing emissions globally. The first measure was the US agreed to unilaterally reduce its emissions, and this was agreed by all other teams. And the second point was a global UN inspection for agreed upon emission standards. And China supports this only if the US is in favor. The third point for reducing emissions was a US plan to locally tax carbon emissions. But the US did not agree to this fully. The fourth point was a curved carbon cap and trade policy, which was spearheaded by SAARC. But all other teams wanted another metric and not per capita. The third main issue which was agreed was developed nations to invest in India and the SAARC region in general. They would invest in renewable energy sources, transportation infrastructure, sustainable development, and also address the humanitarian refugee crisis in the area. The fourth point was China to invest in India and the SAARC region in the same categories, namely renewable energy sources, transportation infrastructure, sustainable development, and addressing the refugee crisis. But China had a set of conditions for them to invest, and this issue is still being negotiated. The fifth main point were dams on the Brahmaputra River. The US wanted to fund an environmental project before this was approved. And also, India and the SAARC wanted to probe existing and future dams. The sixth main point was the US debt repayment plan to China. China wanted the US to invest the debt repayment, which amounted to about $60 billion in solar energy. But the other teams wanted the effect to be globally beneficial. Also, they were worried about a global economic collapse in the event of US investing $60 billion. They wanted an independent economic study on the impact of the proposed solutions, a clear-cut timeline, and joint collaboration with the other teams. The seventh point was US and UN agreed to appeal to G7 to invest in India. The investment will be for climate adaptation and mitigation, creation of a green climate fund, and a G7 committee to disperse funds to India as well as the SAARC. The eighth point was expanding the US-India energy dialogue, which has been very successful, to include other countries as well, namely China and the SAARC. The ninth and final point was consequences for the failure to meet goals. Everyone wanted group checks and balances in place to ensure that countries do not fail to meet their goals. But at the end, everyone agreed to internal regulation. Hey, Tara.
One second, Nick. Thank you so much for doing it. You're all set. Can you hit unrecord? Thanks.
How do I do that?
Those 2 hours, man. They're crying. Yeah, thank you so much, Nick.
I don't know how to stop it.
It's okay. You just hit this button again.